Good morning, everyone. We're going to give folks a minute or so to get online with us, and then we'll start our webinar. Thank you. Good morning. I think we'll get started. We still have people joining us. I'm Sandra McDonough with Oregon Business and Industry. Thank you for joining our webinar this morning. I'd like to start by acknowledging our support from Bank of America. They make our series possible, so thank you very much for sponsoring this, Bank of America. We have some very important issues to talk about today. The issue everybody's talking about, and that's when you're getting vaccines. If you have a question for our speakers, please put it in the Q&A box and we will relay it to the speakers over the course of the webinar. I also want to let you know that this webinar will be recorded and it's being posted to our website. We're finding that a lot of our members like to check back on the website and watch our webinars later. So for the last 13 months, Oregon and the entire world has been in a crisis mode that we've never dealt with before with this pandemic. It's had a tremendous impact on public health and on our ability to work and maintain our economy. So fortunately, with vaccines happening, the end is in sight, we hope, as thousands and thousands of people are vaccinated every week. We're joined today by people who are leaders in the vaccine effort. So I'm going to turn this over to my board chair and my boss, Karen Vineyard of Bank of America. Karen, it's all yours.
Thanks, Sandy. Bank of America is very proud to sponsor the entire OBI speaker series, but personally, I'm very grateful to support this morning's event. At Bank of America, we're committed to supporting access to the vaccines for our employees, our clients, and our communities. As a banker, I'm especially happy to see that all employees working in bank branches are currently eligible to get the vaccine in Oregon. These dedicated employees at Bank of America and all financial institutions have been working very hard to make sure that our communities continue to meet their financial needs. In support of our own employees, Bank of America has just announced that all US employees will be getting an additional 2 half days of paid time off just so that they can get the vaccine. Our goal is to break down as many barriers as possible to support our employees getting vaccinated. Now, beyond our employees, Bank of America is committed to supporting the broader community to ensure our most vulnerable populations can also access the vaccine. We recently granted Virginia Garcia Memorial Foundation $150,000 to aid them in doing just that. They're focused on providing access to vaccinations to the Latinx, migrant farm worker, and refugee populations. And for these vulnerable Oregonians, securing a vaccine appointment as well as accessing that appointment can both be very challenging. So our support will enable Virginia Garcia to take their mobile van directly to these vulnerable communities and provide on-site access to vaccines and other medical care. Well, today we're joined by 2 leaders in the vaccine rollout process. Sharon Laverton, Deputy Vice President at PhRMA Research and Manufacturers of America, commonly known as PhRMA, will be speaking and providing an update on vaccine manufacturing and distribution, both at the national level and here in Oregon. Kathy Kaufman is the employer outreach lead at the Oregon Health Authority, working to connect the private sector with the information we need to get our employees vaccinated. Sharon and Kathy, thank you both for being here. I'll start first with Kathy to get things started, and then about 10:25, we'll transition to Sharon, and then we'll have some time for Q&A from the audience. Kathy, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Karen. Good morning, everybody. Happy to be with you. And if you have listened to, read, or watched the news this morning, you know that this is a pretty timely webinar. I have some new information to share. So I'm going to pull up slides. I am going to try not to be too duplicative of a webinar that I gave to OBI members previously, but also want to make sure all of you have up-to-date information on where you and your employees can access vaccines. So maybe repeating myself a little bit. I'll try and move through it quickly. Okay, so I'm going to share information about the rollout, where we are, including the news released today about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, remind you of the employer toolkit and information that you need to share with your employees, and then talk a little bit about opportunities to partner on the vaccine rollout. So where we are today, through the end of last week, Oregon has administered about 2.3 million doses of vaccine to over 1 million people. 900,000 people in Oregon have been fully vaccinated. We've got another 500,000 that are on their way. Vaccine supply has been fairly limited for the last few months. There certainly have been challenges with Johnson & Johnson supply because of issues with the Baltimore factory. And then news released this morning that J&J has been put on pause pending further safety review. And I'll share a little bit more about that in my next slide. But regardless, Oregon is still on track to receive enough doses to vaccinate everyone 16 and older who wants a vaccine by this summer. We also presume that sometime, likely in the next month, 12 to 15-year-olds will be approved for Pfizer, in addition to the 16 and 17-year-olds that are already approved to receive Pfizer. So the J&J pause. So OHA, in line with the CDC and FDA announcements this morning, has asked all of our providers who were administering Johnson & Johnson to stop doing so immediately, a temporary pause. This is being done out of an abundance of caution, as 6 cases of a rare and severe type of blood clot in individuals who received the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are reviewed. So this is 6 cases out of 6.8 million doses of J&J that have been administered in the US to date. So extremely rare, sounds scary, but further review is needed to know whether or not there's any relationship with the vaccine itself. And it shows us that the tracking system for adverse events is working, right? So out of 6 cases, the system catches the potential issue, and immediately across the country, vaccines are put on pause while further information is gathered and review conducted. So as the state gets more information, we'll be developing detailed communications to send out to the public at large, as well as our provider partners. And we'll be releasing today guidance for people who have received the J&J vaccine in the last couple of weeks, what they should watch out for and when to call a doctor if certain symptoms appear. Again, this is out of an abundance of caution. Something similar happened with the AstraZeneca vaccine that is being used in Europe and the UK. And after further review of that vaccine, it was decided that the benefit outweighed the potential risk. The risk seemed to be primarily for younger adults, and that vaccine is now back being administered. Okay. So now let me just do a refresher on where we are right now as far as eligibility. I think I've talked with you all previously that we've done eligibility in phases because of low vaccine supply, to make sure that we're prioritizing those with a disproportionate risk of COVID. Right now, we're still working through agricultural, seafood, food processing workers, frontline workers are all eligible, people with a long list of underlying health conditions that put them at increased risk. We've expanded the list of health conditions that now includes people with substance use disorders, previous smokers, even if it's been a long time since you've smoked, and the BMI, body mass index line for obesity has been dropped from 30 down to 25 now. And that everyone, we are days away now from everyone in the state 16 and older being eligible by Monday, April 19th. So only a few more days of phased eligibility before it's opened up broadly. Here's the list of underlying health conditions with increased risk. You know, with this list, we are quite frankly pretty close to universal eligibility for adults. Well over 50% of adults in the United States would qualify because of one or more of these conditions. So now let me talk a little bit about where you can get the vaccine. So there are a number of different channels. We've got mass vaccination clinics. I'll talk about where in a minute. All the local public health authorities, every county around the state is working to get vaccine out to communities. Many pharmacies, especially the national retail pharmacies, as well as some grocery pharmacies, are providing vaccines. Federally qualified health centers like Virginia Garcia was just talked about in our opening. Mobile clinics, tribal health authorities, Veterans Administration health providers. There have been some work sites or worker housing sites where vaccine has been administered primarily for agricultural and migrant seasonal farm workers. And then primary care providers are now also starting to provide the vaccine. It's pretty limited in some parts of the state, more likely in you know, rural areas. Your primary care provider may have vaccine. Some primary care providers in the Portland metro area or Salem area or Eugene are starting to get vaccines. And over time, we'll see more and more of a transition to a vaccine being available through a primary care doc instead of through, say, a mass vaccination clinic. But in order to get as many people vaccinated as quickly as possible, we're relying on more mass vax clinics and certainly pharmacies as great ways to get shots in a lot of arms very quickly. So there are so many different channels to get a vaccine. Many of them are using different appointment setting functions. So there's no one place to look at availability across the region. However, the state has developed a website, covidvaccine.oregon.gov. I usually mention it about 27 times in every presentation that I give, where you can access all kinds of information, including how to find a vaccine, communication materials, and links to appointment setting web pages. So when you go to that covidvaccine.oregon.gov website, this is what the page looks like. You'll see this big red arrow down at the bottom pointing you to the button, how to find a vaccine in the state. If you click on that, you'll get links to all the different ways to look for vaccines, including links to each of the retail pharmacies we know are receiving vaccine, either because the state is providing it or they're receiving it directly from the federal government. Each pharmacy is using their own appointment setting function. We also provide something called the Get Vaccinated Oregon tool. I encourage you all, and I encourage you to encourage your employees to sign up for this tool. This tool will push information out to you when everybody becomes eligible. It's the way to get appointments at the Oregon Convention Center. You actually get a link if you live in the Tri-County area to access appointment at the Oregon Convention Center Mass Vax site. It will also provide you links and information about how to access vaccine anywhere across the state. Also really important to know in communicating with your employees as well as for yourselves, vaccines are free to everybody. You do not need to have health insurance to get a free vaccine, but if your employees do have health coverage, it's important they bring their insurance card so that the providers are able to bill the administrative fee for providing the vaccine. Again, that gets billed to the insurance provider. A consumer does not pay anything for a vaccine. You also do not need to show proof that you are eligible for any of these categories. Again, that question will go away in a matter of days when every single person in the state above the age of 16 becomes eligible on Monday. And then presumably, if there is federal approval for it, 12 to 15-year-olds will be eligible in the coming weeks. You do not need to provide a social security number. You do not need to be a US citizen. It does not affect immigration status and nor will it be counted as public charge. Those are also important messages for some workers. So vaccine confidence, setting the news about J&J aside, in general, there's a fairly high level of hesitancy about the vaccines. 20% of people in Oregon, when we've done some recent focus group and survey work, say that they won't get the vaccine, while another 40% have some reservations. They say they likely will or they likely won't. They're on the fence. So to build vaccine confidence, it's really important to share information about vaccine safety, effectiveness, and side effects. And we're finding again and again that when people are hesitant, really the best thing to encourage them to be willing to get the vaccine is for them to see someone they know get it and be okay. So I'll talk very briefly about, I know we have a great pharmacy partner here with us today. I'll talk very briefly about vaccine safety and efficacy. Vaccines were authorized very, very quickly. That does not mean that they aren't safe. They have authorization was conducted through emergency use authorization because of the global pandemic and the number of lives that were already lost. Regardless of which vaccine an individual gets, they are all incredibly effective. It is very hard to compare one vaccine to another. It's particularly challenging to compare J&J to Pfizer and Moderna, as the clinical trials were done at different time periods. J&J was done later when there were far more variants of COVID more contagious variants. But all of these vaccines are incredibly effective. Both Pfizer and Moderna require 2 doses, Johnson & Johnson 1 dose. For Pfizer and Moderna, you reach sort of full protection from the vaccine 2 weeks after the second dose. And for the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, it's 28 days, so 4 weeks after the one and only dose. And again, Pfizer is the only vaccine currently approved for people who are under 18. It's just approved for 16 and 17-year-olds. We expect Pfizer to be approved for 12 to 15-year-olds in the coming weeks or next month. So let me briefly talk about side effects. So there are side effects from the vaccine, perfectly normal, not life-threatening side effects. They really vary from person to person. They last for a day or two at the most. They are normal. They are to be expected. They're a sign that your body is building protection. And the most common, there's also pretty extensive tracking of side effects, which is why the CDC and the FDA were able to catch the issue of the handful of folks who experienced blood clots and put a pause on J&J because of that tracking system. So we've got pretty good information on what side effects are so far for the millions of people who've been vaccinated in the country. And they're what you would expect: pain at the injection site, some redness and swelling where the needle went in. And then, maybe a day later, joint pain, headache, fever, although that one's a little less common, muscle aches, tiredness, chills, really feeling like a low-grade flu. It's important for employers to know, though, that it's really common. It's highly likely when your employees get vaccinated, particularly after the second shot, for the folks who are receiving a 2-dose vaccine, that they'll be out sick for, probably not more than a day, but it's real. They're likely not faking it. So for now, a reminder, after the vaccine, still wear a mask, still socially distance. We do not know for sure that you cannot transmit the virus, even when you are vaccinated against it, though we're starting to see a better evidence base around that. But until we know for sure that you can't pass the vaccine on, particularly given that we've seen a rise in cases, alarmingly high in some parts of the country, not as bad here in Oregon, but still rising. It's important that we stick with the wearing masks and socially distancing, because that has been what's kept Oregon on the lower end of cases compared to other states. So lastly, the last few slides here. Please share information and stories with your employees about the COVID vaccines. It's really important that we get messaging out through every channel we can. Employers are a great source of information for their employees. It is complicated. It isn't just one vaccine. It isn't just one place to go to get the vaccine. So please share information about when, where, and how to get the vaccine, about vaccine safety. And to help you do this, we have developed a toolkit that is up on that covidvaccine.oregon.gov website that has language you can just cut and paste. It's got things you can put up on your social media channels just to make this really easy for you to spread information far and wide. And again, a reminder, please share stories of yourselves, other members of your workforce getting vaccinated who are willing to share it, because again, seeing someone you know get vaccinated and be okay is what is most likely to prompt someone who's hesitant to change their mind and be willing to receive the vaccine. We also encourage you, if you're not already, paid time off for vaccine appointments, as well as to recover from side effects and even support helping get your workers to vaccine sites if they need it. We also encourage you all, and I know many of you already are, to support vaccine efforts in your local communities. As schools are opening up next week, some communities are losing the space that they were using for vaccine events. So if you've got large space that you can offer up for a community vaccine event, please let your local public health authority know. Volunteers are also needed and welcome. So if you can offer up your workforce as volunteers for events, that's also incredibly beneficial. If you happen to have any employees with clinical training who are able to give shots, that's where we've got a pretty severe workforce shortage. Our health systems are strained. They've been doing incredible work for the last few months. So if you can do a call out to your employees to see if anyone has that training, and encourage them to sign up and volunteer at what's called serve-or, the serve-or.org website. So again, the employer toolkit, which has an array of materials that you can use to make communication easy, is available at this covidvaccine.oregon.gov website. If you just follow this bright yellow arrow to community resources, it will take you to this page, and then you'll see the second section, toolkits for specific groups. We've got our employer toolkit right here where the yellow arrow is. And lastly, I'll just say, if you are interested in hosting an on-site vaccine event, that may be possible. Some businesses are already working with their local public health authority to do employer events. But I just want to make really clear to everybody it's going to be very limited. We do not have enough supply for every business to be able to do this. For most local public health authorities, it will only make sense if your employees are one of their high priority groups. For example, people who are Black, Indigenous, or other people of colors, or frontline workers that were really concerned about being missed. You need to have a large number of employees. You need to have a healthcare partner, and just know that it takes a lot of time and planning, and there really will only be able to be a few of these. But the ones that we are able to do will be really critical and an important way to make sure that we don't miss frontline workers in particular, but all types of employees. So that's the end of my slides. I presume we'll hold questions till the end, but I look forward to answering any that you have.
Kathy, thank you for your presentation. And we'll now switch over to Sharon to hear more about the industry's perspective on the vaccine rollout. Sharon?
Sharon, you need to unmute.
Sorry, it was saying host is about to unmute. Sorry, we were in time. There we go. I wanted to thank you for inviting me to speak, and what a great presentation that Kathy just gave. I hope that I won't be redundant in some of this information, but what interesting timing indeed, as she said, with a lot of ongoing news daily, but a lot of good news as well. So again, I want to thank you all for asking me to present here at OBI. PhRMA, for those of you that do not know us, we represent over 33 biopharmaceutical research companies throughout the country. My colleague Jody Hack and I work closely on a number of industry issues that impact patients all over the world, and certainly the pandemic is one of them. Since we've seen the pandemic over the past year, our companies have been amazing. I'll go to the next slide, if you will. And this just displays some of the many ways that vaccines have been helpful over the history that we've seen. In our lifetime, we've seen now 16 diseases that are now preventable in the United States. We have over $1.4 trillion that are saved in societal costs because of vaccine and disease prevention. There are amazing skills that our pharmaceutical companies and researchers use since the pandemic declaration to use in decoding the virus in less than 4 months, where it took 20 months to decode SARS, and to develop a vaccine in less than a year. And not only one, but now we have 3, potentially 4. And the reason why I'm going to emphasize the pipeline of the vaccines and treatments that we have right now is because of such things that we see today, where we do see some safety concerns right now identified with J&J. Hopefully, I will be able to say some things to put that in perspective, but nevertheless, the severity of anyone having a related side effect, much less death, is an important piece to our industry. We are going to take that seriously. We do take it seriously. We stop deployment. We try to figure out exactly what the causative factors are, and if there needs to be restrictions placed, they will, or if the drug needs to be pulled, it will. So I want to make sure that we know that as we head into this presentation, that we are very aware as the trade association representing all of our pharmaceutical companies that don't just produce COVID treatments and vaccines, but half of our companies are doing so right now, and we're very proud of the progress made. Next slide. So some of the ways that we started mobilizing, as I mentioned, as soon as we decoded the virus in 4 months, we looked at what might be on the shelf that we could utilize. What are antiretrovirals? What are anti-infectives that could be used toward this nasty virus that we had never seen before? What are ways we could repurpose those medications already on the shelf? Also, what could we do to develop vaccines? You're going to see in one of my slides how complex vaccine delivery is. It's not a one-size-fits-all. I mean, how many of us could say we knew what mRNA was until a year ago? And now it seems to be like as common as the word Pepsi or Coke. But it's something that is a technology that's been around for over 20 to 30 years, but just now used in vaccines, and hopefully many more medicines to come, especially oncology. We also were able to ramp up manufacturing capabilities like never before. In my 19 years at PhRMA, and before that as a clinical nurse at National Institutes of Health, I had never seen pharmaceutical companies partner and produce and manufacture millions of doses before they got the green light by FDA. And that seems to be a waste if they were denied. And maybe it would have been, but thankfully they were approved with emergency use authorization, and that brought us all the faster to get a faster route to get shots in the arms of those that need it. So I'm very grateful that Pfizer did make that decision, and other companies, to manufacture millions before the approval process. Next slide. One of the important pieces I do want to touch on today, and actually will be rolled out tomorrow for our industry, is clinical trial diversity. And what I mean by that is not just diversity of race, But it is very important that as we looked back this past year, especially with COVID, we need to always make sure, no matter what the clinical trial is, that the end product or treatment that we're developing is reflective of the treatment population for which it's intended. We all know that COVID unfortunately disproportionately impacts communities of color. It also disproportionately impacts those that have obesity and those that suffer from diabetes and other airway or respiratory illnesses. So we need to make sure that when we look at our clinical trials, that those clinical trial subjects comprise the diversity of medical background, of race, of gender, and other profiles. So we did something unprecedented. In my 19 years in the industry, I'd never seen clinical trial protocol for diversity. And we unveiled this back in November, but it was wonderful to see that all of our member companies are voluntarily embracing this. These are not principles that are going to get dusty. They're actually living principles that say, what is it that's stopping people from getting enrolled in clinical trials? What is it that's preventing them from completing the clinical trial as a subject that just enrolled? Maybe it's a transportation barrier. Maybe it's a communication barrier. Maybe who knows what it might be, but what can we do to acknowledge that, to figure out how to reduce those barriers and make sure that we have the continuity there. Next slide. So something that a lot of people do not know is not only is it risky and expensive to develop any medicine, because any medicine that's developed from phase 1 through phase 3, 88% fail. Only 12% make it. And in the vaccine space, it's even higher. 5% are likely to succeed. So that's huge, because we know we need as many shots on goal. We need as many attempts in that pipeline as possible so that we have the successes that will work, not just for the US, but for other countries who might not have proper refrigeration or other requirements that a vaccine might require. As we've seen, some of the vaccines required -70 under Celsius temperatures. How can that be possible for some countries that don't even have basic refrigeration, let alone coolers? So this is important because we need to know that there are many different types of shots or vaccinations. There are many different ways that it goes about combating the virus. Next slide. As we look at this, I'm so proud of our industry for that, 18 to 24 months and 7 years it usually takes to bring a vaccine. We've had 3 come to market and be approved for the EAU use in less than 12 months. But a lot of the public were concerned and still are. You'll hear the vaccine hesitancy comments. You'll hear the concern that there were safety or corners cut by the FDA. And while today, this very day, April 13th, where we hear that J&J is pausing their dissemination of their vaccine due to these blood clotting issues that have been found in the United States and other countries, we want to reiterate that the safety standards have not been shortcut. They are the same commitments that stand for any review of a medication. They were FDA is probably the gold standard in the entire country and the entire world rather for safe medicine. So I want to make sure that everybody knows that our monitoring of the product does not stop when you get approval or EUA of a medicine. It actually continues with intense pharmacovigilance or safety monitoring for years after that product is launched. A lot of people say, well, Sharon, gosh, you guys have the emergency use authorization for some of these vaccines and treatments, the phenomenal treatments we'll touch on in a moment. Does that mean you're going to stop, or do you continue with approval for these medicines? Many of our companies have already initiated that. They are not stopping with emergency use authorization. They are going to continue with the full approval process for the FDA, because at some point the pandemic will end and we will be able to, the HHS secretary will declare it over, which will have a lot of impact on a number of things, but certainly approval will be important to get for these medicines. So that is in the process and in the works for many of our companies. Next slide. Thank you. So this is a great slide because it gives us hope as we hear about all these mutations and strains that are out there. Just today, we heard rather good news actually to counter some of the J&J dampening news, we heard that the UK variant, which is the most prevalent in the United States and the most contagious, may not be as dangerous as we think. It is not resulting in as many hospitalizations and mortality rates as previously thought. So with that, you still have to wonder though, we know in the immunology world and the infectious disease world that viruses replicate. That is what they do. That is not a surprise to us. We know coronavirus replicates every 2 weeks. So these variants that we hear, whether it's UK, Brazilian, South African, those might be the prevalent ones today. We don't know what they will be in 6 months or when kids are returning for fall for colleges and schools and maybe even us into the workforce. We don't know what mutations are out there. So that is why it's so important that we continue the message that Kathy reiterated and others on that we have to get ourselves vaccinated and protected. This is the one thing that we can do to get ourselves and get society back to normal. So when this slide lists 1,795 clinical trials in process for treatments or vaccines, that's incredibly exciting news. And in Oregon alone, there are 14 clinical trials within the state. That's a credit to Oregon and the intense and incredible bioscience environment that is out there in Oregon and the policies that are there that strengthen our industry and our ability to do the important research and development work. Next slide. So as you, and by the way, we can get that breakdown for where in Oregon that might be, those research clinical trials are occurring if you should be interested. Earlier in the presentation, I referenced that there are different approaches to developing vaccines. We are used to the flu vaccine that might be on the 9 o'clock of this particular visual, the inactivated flu vaccine, which you look at the three most prominent variants that might be in the world for flu. The CDC identifies that, and we get a flu vaccine every year based on that prognostic, that prediction. However, it's not always correct. We used in the COVID vaccines now with Pfizer and Moderna, the mRNA, which is a very unique novel approach. Has it ever been used in a medicine ever before now? No. Was it being studied? Yes, as early as 1980s. And it's really unique because it's using your own body, your genetic code to mobilize and create proteins that are forming antibodies that will be like the soldiers that are at the ready to combat the COVID virus when you are interacting with that virus. When your body confronts that virus, you'll have them ready. Now, how long do those soldiers or antibodies stay at the ready? We don't know. We predict that there will be a need for booster shots, maybe every 6 months. We are not sure. We are still studying and seeing that the antibodies are at least prevalent for about a year. But let's face that, that could be in the next couple months. So it is very reassuring to know that many of our member companies have booster research clinical trials underway right now to understand what needs to be done to inoculate patients against the new variants or to keep their titers high. There's also other approaches we've seen with J&J and with AZ. J&J uses a cold virus, an adenovirus, which was used in Ebola vaccines, yet AZ is using a chimpanzee type virus. These are both one-dose shots, which are really great. And again, for a population that may not be able to be as adherent or come back as a guarantee for that second shot, these are good options for those populations. However, it just reiterates the point that we don't want to stop with, oh, we've got Pfizer, we've got Moderna, let's just stop and mass produce. It may not be the right fit. We need as many options as we can. And let's face it, there's a lot more than just our population that we need to be able to treat in the United States. We need to look at the entire world to help vaccinate. Many of our countries haven't even received even a fourth of their population hasn't even started to get vaccinated, and some haven't had any. So we need to definitely remember the holistic view for the entire world, because travel will begin, and we should have that empathy and care for the other patients that are in other countries that are less fortunate. Next slide. So we look at this pipeline and it's quite exciting. Of course, your eye might trend to the far right, which is the newer approvals. What's really close to getting approved? And again, this changes quite frequently. And this is our sister company Bio slide. And it's wonderful because it does show the EUA that has been received for of course, our Pfizer and our Moderna. We know that AZ is very close to getting approved potentially in the United States. It does not have its application into the FDA yet, but we know it's already been used and approved in Europe and many other countries. So looking to the left, you might see, oh gosh, Sharon, those are a lot of people in phase 1 and 2. That's going to be a long time before they get their clinical trials underway and completed. Not necessarily. Those folks are on the heels of some of the others, and it's really important to see that Merck and Sanofi and others are really working hard. I also would be remiss to be able to, if I did not say that 9 of our member companies, 9 of our 33 member companies have stepped up to do unusual partnerships, who have said, okay, maybe our clinical trial flubbed, and we want to take the opportunity to help you, Pfizer, manufacture all or a part of your vaccine. So these 9 unique partnerships that I've not seen before have formed in order to help meet the demand of vaccines or treatments. And again, really wonderful and delightful to see, because quite honestly, they are willing to replicate a recipe. They have the infrastructure and the knowledge and the expertise, which is huge. So why not? So this might be one of those things that when we refer to what are the best practices industries learned during this pandemic that might apply to other disease states, this might be one of them. Next slide. So as we look at the different variants that I mentioned earlier, we are concerned. We know we need to continue vaccinations. We know we have to watch, and we are watching the spread of these variants. And we know the new treatments and vaccines must continue. A lot of people say, good night, we know a lot about vaccines, but what about treatments? So in the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about just reminding that vaccines are important, but treatments are as well. And if you go to the next slide, this is a great reminder, just as we touched on earlier, phase 1, 2, and 3. And then you see phase 4, which a lot of people don't ever hear about, but that refers to that navy stripe on the far right, refers to the continuous monitoring and pharmacovigilance that we all do post-approval. Next slide. And this is the handoff slide. A lot of people say, okay, what happens when the FDA immediately or within a day or two will review it and hopefully approve it? What happens? Well, the manufacturers are preparing to make sure they can get it shipped. The ACIP, which is meeting, I believe, tomorrow, will be looking at J&J and some of the safety issues. And of course, they will be also meeting after AZ submits their information to the FDA, but they are a critical committee to look at coverage decisions and guidelines and what population should be covered and what age groups. Then it gets distributed. That is not a process that we manufacturers are involved with, but our partners, our distributors are terrific in doing that. It goes to pods, points of dispensing or delivery sites where they're injected into the arms of patients that need it. It could be at hospitals. A pod could be at a car wash. A pod could be the YMCA parking lot or a sports arena. Very creative places in the community where we can get people flowing quickly. Could be a Six Flags amusement park like it is up in Maryland and where I live. And these are important areas that are getting this in. Yes, the dissemination might not have been as quick as we have seen, but I am very happy to see how the administration has expedited the administration. And now almost every American that wants one should be able to get it by April 19th is the prediction for the Biden administration. Next slide. So as we look at the myths and misconceptions that are out there, a lot of folks have them, even within my own family. You might hear, well, maybe those vaccines were made from fetal cells. Maybe the vaccines are not studied as carefully as they should have been. there's reticence and there's concern. And so it's really important that we get experts out there, but also that campaigns of patient groups that are important and that are working with the provider groups get that message from CDC and FDA out there. I just read an article this morning that, interestingly enough, the Biden administration is focusing on outreach to the country music TV station. They're also reaching out to NASCAR and Dangerous or Deadly Catch, I guess they call it, which is an interesting TV show. But those three aspects of community represent the demographics that are exhibiting concern through polling. So that's a great way to outreach. They're also figuring out that good old-fashioned door-to-door knocking in communities works better than phone calls and anything on the internet. So we don't have it all figured out. I think we have one of the best public health systems in the world, but it is a shame when we're having a slower rollout than we anticipated, knowing that we are going to have these vaccines in December or January. So I think we can safely say, and the epidemiologists have said, it's not if, but when we have the next pandemic, we need to have learned from this and know what we're going to do better to be more nimble and get our medications out there. Next slide. So there are state challenges. We know that Oregon's had them, even though Oregon's been extremely organized, really from the get-go. You guys had submitted to the CDC your state action plan early on and mobilized very quickly with all of the stakeholders in your state to figure out how you are going to roll it out to priority populations, how you were going to get the sufficient provider enrollment onboarding to administer the vaccines, how you were going to handle storage, who was going to be the refrigeration police, and so forth. But there are still challenges, no doubt. Next slide. So this is a good one as we come to the end of my vaccine and treatment presentation, to remind you that there are a plethora of tools that providers use to treat and to prevent COVID. And among them are our monoclonal antibodies that are wonderful treatments that many of our companies make that will reduce hospitalization and mortality of those that get it. So we're talking about what could be a patient that is intubated in the intensive care unit, and maybe even hospitalized 21 days and maybe even dies, can now have a 16-minute injection or infusion, rather, IV infusion, and maybe they have a 4-day hospital stay or less. So these are important medications that can help mitigate the effects of this virus, because we do know, one thing we do know is that this virus has caused very different side effects for very different people. So we do need to know that we're not focusing just on vaccines. We need to focus on those that actually get it and how do we get them to recover. Next slide. And my final slide is a medication assistance tool. We all know, unfortunately, many of our friends in our community, or perhaps families or our own families, have had layoffs, have had unemployment during this year, and may even have it in the coming year. And this medication assistance tool is a platform that our industry is designed to provide assistance to those that need help with medicines. This is those that might need help that have insurance. Maybe you don't have any insurance at all. And it will help provide free or nearly free medicines to those that need it. So I implore you to remember this website if you remember nothing else in the presentation, mat.org, because you don't even need to know the spelling of your medicine. You can put it in there and you can answer some very basic questions that are not intensely private. You're not giving away your social security number or anything invasive, but it helps gear this information for you to know. I take A, B, C, D, E, F, G medications. Okay, of those, what manufacturers, because there are so many of them, I can't go one by one. This is an efficient one-stop shopping. Which one of those manufacturers or how many of them will offer some assistance to the medications that I need to and I can't currently afford. So really great information on that site. And then finally, next and final slide is our resource slide. PhRMA.org/coronavirus is a great resource website for those that might need it and want to understand some of the differences and the newest advances within our industry. we have that. We can also point you to other websites, not just FDA and CDC, but other really terrific websites that give you frequently asked questions. I know that Kathy had one as well that she displayed. A lot of our patient groups have it, but I do want to leave you with the fact that I'm not just presenting here today. Please, and Nathaniel and others, as you, anybody from OBI and in our community in Oregon, Jody and I are here to help. We want to be a resource and a partner as we get through this pandemic together. So I want to thank you for this opportunity.
Kathy and Sharon, thank you for your presentations this morning. I just have a few questions for you before we turn it over to our audience. Kathy, you mentioned all Oregonians 16 and older will become eligible to receive the vaccine coming Monday. And while this is great news, how are you going to manage the expectations of hundreds of thousands of people suddenly becoming eligible, especially now with the news about J&J? And you know, will our appointment systems be able to handle it? And what are you expecting on Monday?
Great question. So yes, the job just got a lot harder with the news that I got at 5 a.m. today about J&J. The good news is even if we end up with no J&J, and I hope that's not what happens, we're still on track to make sure that every Oregonian that wants a vaccine is able to get one by this summer. That doesn't mean that everyone who becomes eligible on Monday will be able to get an appointment next week. It will still take time to get people scheduled and get vaccines out. So, you know, it is complicated messaging. We have been trying to, you know, say all along that vaccine is in short supply. It's going to get time to get to everyone, but everyone who wants a shot will get a shot. We've had some practice now over the last few months of what happens when eligibility opens up. There is always sort of a drain on the appointment systems on that first day of eligibility. So we expect there may be some hiccups on Monday. Thus far, you know, we've gotten to the point where any challenge to the system, for example, I know OHSU had a real issue last Monday when they opened up some new appointments and more people were waiting in the wings to snatch those appointments than their server could handle. But it was resolved pretty quickly. I think we're in a much better place as far as our systems go right now. And we also have so many more channels than we did when we started this work a few months ago. For example, pharmacies weren't offering vaccine when we first started rolling it out to the general public, and they are now all online and offering appointments. So will it be perfect and seamless? Probably not. But will it be functional, and will we make sure that every Oregonian who wants a vaccine gets connected to one? Absolutely.
I appreciate that. And I also appreciated your overview on the employer toolkit. We've heard from several companies that have actually used it. Good. And I'm curious to know, what is the status of the employers hosting vaccination clinics at their work sites? And do we have if we have a business that's interested, who should they talk to?
Yeah, this is an important question. I want to make sure that I communicate really clearly around this. So, you know, we've got vaccine shortage, and the news about J&J now makes this even harder. Some local public health authorities are already working with businesses in their communities and offering employer vaccine events. So, you know, that can continue to happen if it works for the local public health authority. But I want to make sure everyone understands that because of the supply shortages, because of the need to make sure that we are not leaving disproportionately impacted communities behind, very few employers will actually get to have an employee vaccine site. Now, that doesn't mean that the state or your local public health authority can't help you make sure that your employees get connected to a vaccine. There are all kinds of options, including partnering with a pharmacy, partnering with an existing vaccine site to make sure that your employees can get connected to appointments. I think this is especially important if you have employees who are likely frontline workers and aren't able to sit in front of a computer at 9 a.m. on a Monday or at some other point during the week to find an appointment. We do want to make sure that no one is left behind, but I want to be clear, there will only be able to be a few employer vaccine sites, and you will need to work with local public health to make sure it fits for them. And the best candidates are, you have a large number of employees, you have employees that are in priority populations, our BIPOC communities or other workers who are at greater risk. It's also important to have a healthcare partner. If you've done flu vaccines for your employees in the past, you have some sense of what this work entails. But of course, the COVID vaccines are a little bit more complicated to handle and administer than a flu vaccine. They've got different storage requirements. They need to be used quickly. And then there are observation periods after the vaccine is administered, where medical personnel needs to be on hand in case somebody were to have an adverse reaction to the shot. So I'm sorry to be a big wet blanket. Some employer sites are going to happen, and they're going to be really important where they do. And Sandy has been a wonderful partner to me in trying to identify a handful of sites around the state that the state could sponsor, meaning we could provide some supply, but there'll just be very few of these. But that doesn't mean you are on your own to figure out a way for your employees to get vaccinated. Start with the toolkit, work with your local public health authority, and always feel free to reach out to me if I can help or answer other questions.
Thank you, Kathy. Sharon, you mentioned the efficiency and effectiveness of the vaccine manufacturing process from development to distribution in a year certainly has been historic. And you also mentioned some of the lessons learned from this experience in the industry. Can you talk a little bit about the impact that will happen with the development and timing of other drugs coming to market? And what do you think long-term that will mean for medications getting to market sooner?
That's a great question, Karen. So we were operating under this pandemic under a very different approval process in that we still had safety standards that we were needing to meet by FDA, but it's called emergency use authorization, very different from the approval process that the FDA lays out for ordinary times, if you will. So with that said, we have learned that we couldn't wait. We needed to expedite our learnings, our best practices, and we needed to collaborate with partners from all over the world. The European Medicines Association, the Chinese Medicine Association, we were sharing clinical trial data in real time, which we had not done before. So we've learned a lot of good things that will apply to other disease states, to your point. How many? I can't answer that. Of course, being a trade association representing all 33 of our companies, everybody has learned, and they are developing what they will use and incorporate going forward. But I have no doubt that not just the technologies that have come up since this pandemic has emerged, like the mRNA, but just the way we've collaborated. I don't know if you all know, but a lot of our member companies have become even more transparent with the revealing data of what we learned during clinical trial. Now, it may not make much sense to somebody like my mom, who's very smart, but she's not in the industry like me. But just the fact that we are in industries voluntarily sharing that information, so that if you want to dig into that and you want that information, it's there. There's nothing that's being hidden. So I love that our companies have gone above and beyond in the transparency mode, in the way we're sharing with partners. 33 of us, we're usually competitive. It's who can bring that drug to market the fastest. So when we did kind of say, let's link arms with each other, it's been phenomenal to see some of the good things that have resulted. So I assume many of those things will continue for sure.
Well, I want to make sure our audience has a moment. So Nathaniel, I'm going to turn it over to you to ask any additional questions from the audience. And Kathy and Sharon, thank you both for being here today. Nathaniel?
Yeah, thank you, Karen, and thanks, Sharon and Kathy, for sharing that information. We do have a few questions here from the audience. I think you've answered a couple of them in your remarks, but to answer Donna's question about sending out slides, yes, they will be posted to our website with the recording later today. And then we had a question about for Kathy on the Johnson & Johnson announcement, how that might actually impact the rollout and the timeline here in Oregon.
Yeah, it's a good question. And obviously we're sorting through, there's a lot of uncertainty and we don't know what will happen with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. However, we don't currently have a whole lot of J&J vaccine in the state right now. So it's really a minor blip for appointments that are out there currently. And we're working to make sure that people get J&J swapped for a different vaccine while we wait to see what happens. Needless to say, losing a vaccine that was estimated to be produced at 8 million a week across the country will have some impact on us. We were also really looking forward to having a vaccine in high supply that only required 1 dose. It would be great to use for community-based events. We don't know that we're losing that option, but I can give you some assurance that even if we've got the worst case scenario and J&J is pulled, we are still on track to being able to make sure anybody who wants a vaccine is able to get one by this summer. So it will definitely make an impact. The impact shouldn't be severe. It should be the difference of 2 or 3 weeks before we can hit the goal that we're trying to get to by summertime.
Thank you. And we are right at 11, so I'm going to pass it off to Sandy to close us out. I will note Allison had a question around a public health recommendation for employers, whether or not they should be mandating the vaccine. And I am going to we hosted a webinar on that a couple weeks ago. I'm going to put that link in the chat for everybody. And with that, I will pass it off to Sandy.
Great, thank you. Just very quickly, Sharon and Kathy, thank you for a great webinar. Sharon is somebody who had access for my turn at the vaccination a few weeks ago. I want to tell you how much I appreciate the great research all of your member companies, many of whom are my member companies as well, do. So thank you for that and for making our world safer. And Kathy, you're a great partner. We have another meeting in like 1 minute. So I'm going to be talking to you about how we can get more people vaccinated. That is our biggest focus right now, is getting more people vaccinated. So thank you again. Our next webinar will be on Thursday, May 20th from 10 to 11. I want to remind everybody that this is recorded, so feel free to share it with anybody who missed it today. And with that, thank you. We are adjourned.